I were to ask how many people in this room have a mental illness, I'm sure there'd be at least a few of us with our hands up. Now, the question is, have you been officially diagnosed, or is this a self-diagnosis? And are they interchangeable? If you think not, you'd be right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that self-diagnosis is wrong. To be sure, self-diagnosis is a good thing. According to Lainey Rapsey from the Counseling Collective, self-diagnosis can encourage a more compassionate self-image, be a healthy alternative for those who can't afford mental health care, and be a catalyst for a conversation with a professional. Through the process of self-diagnosis, people often feel less alone in their struggles. Additionally, this process can provide hope by showing that there are options and ways to cope. When you search online for ways to cope with X mental illness, you will find that there are ways other than to seek professional help, which can often be too expensive. So, self-diagnosis can provide an alternative to having to sell your soul to talk to a person for 30 minutes. However, for those who can afford it, self-diagnosis can often strike that first conversation with the professional. According to Liana Redshaw from The Intake, of those who get a second opinion, 82% of them are correct. And yeah, it isn't 100%, but what is 100% is that everyone in that statistic sought help for their distress. So it's easy to conclude that self-diagnosis can be beneficial. To add, she states that 32% of self-diagnosers start medication or treatment. But remember, it's not always necessary to seek that treatment. Sometimes all it takes to start improving your condition is for it to stop making you feel so isolated. Like any one of my speeches, I have a personal experience to add. When I was in around 5th grade, I began my research into what was wrong with me. I knew that what I was feeling wasn't how everyone else seemed to feel. I felt that I functioned differently. I self-diagnosed myself with OCD. That was the first one and the most obvious one. If I touched something cold with my left hand, I would have to then touch it in the same spot for the same duration on my right hand. I also felt I had this invisible string following me around that mustn't get tangled. So I'd catch myself spinning in circles and trying to remember which way I entered a room. This posed problems. For example, I was an altar server at the time, and I thought I would surely look like a fool if the whole congregation saw me chasing my tail. Eventually, I also self-diagnosed myself with ADHD and depression. And after some reluctance to tell my family that I was struggling, I asked if I could go back to therapy. Yes, back, but that's a whole other story. My point is that self-diagnoses worked for me, and I know it has and will work for others. Today, I attend weekly therapy sessions and have been prescribed medication that has honestly worked wonders for my mental health. I'm happy. After years and years of struggle, I'm finally happy. And none of this would have been possible without self-diagnosis. But wait, what if I'm just a fluke? That's what someone from the opposing viewpoint might say. Or should I say viewpoints? According to a qualitative study by Lucy Folks and Rosie Underhill, those who think self-diagnosis is an overall bad thing often point their fingers at adolescents who self-diagnose themselves with mental illness for, as they claim, personal gain. They claim that self-diagnoses are just noise that clutter up the mental health discussions online. Additionally, according to Micah Mulder from Gardner-Webb University, many self-diagnosers find their information from social media sites like TikTok. While it is true, as Mulder states, that a lot of information on TikTok is misinformation, You cannot conclude from this that all or even most self-diagnoses stem from misinformation. All of this can be summed up by the logical fallacy of cherry picking. Not everyone gets their information from the same source, but most people nowadays do get their information online. And yes, it can pose challenges because you have to actively avoid misinformation. However, let's be honest, where else are people expected to get their information from, if not from a doctor themselves? Many libraries do not contain enough books on the topic, and books like the DSM-5, the Book of Disorders, can be expensive and hard to navigate. And to those who think that every diagnosis must come from a professional, according to L. Rutter and others, a self-reported diagnosis can be considered a reliable indicator of their symptoms, especially for common internalizing disorders like depression or anxiety. And researchers can often trust what people say about their own mental health. While it's true that some people think all self-diagnosis is valid and others think that no self-diagnosis is valid, most people actually lie somewhere in between. For me, I lie closer to the former. While sometimes I will admit people are just doing it for attention, most people aren't. And even for those that are, that could indicate their need for professional help. If you remember anything from my speech today, I hope it's this. Even if you are unsure about someone's motive for self-diagnosis, it's important to treat everyone with compassion because you never know when someone might just be looking for a little help. I'm not saying that self-diagnoses are cries for help. Instead, that they show determination to feel better in one's own mind.